Excellent. Thanks, Harry, for being so spontaneously. We know each other already, so but apparently a lot of stuff is happening, probably at Daimler. Therefore, let's discuss a couple of things. Should we? You want to sit there? Then I go. Then I go here. Yeah, we have heard your presentation. So, what do you think is basically happening next year, 2021? Because people like myself, we are expecting blockchain to be very dynamic and so on, and sometimes we are disappointed because it's not going quicker. So where are we, say, today, plus 1 year, end of 2021?
Well, of all the years that I've been doing blockchain, this one is probably the hardest to make any predictions, because obviously we're dealing with the effects of Corona, which have fundamentally changed the dynamics of the whole economic life cycle. And we all know that we're headed in one form or the other for another lockdown. So we cannot assume that this will not have effects. So this will have effects, and they will definitely be effects in the sense of slowing things down and not stopping things, but making everybody a lot more careful, a lot more calculating in what do I do, what don't I do, what do I do maybe later. So 2 months ago, when it was summer and the first lockdown was over, I would have been more or less reasonably positive. Right now, I would say wait and see. Anybody who would want to give a reasonably valid answer should wait at least another 2 months, see whether this is going to become a serious lockdown now or not.
An entirely different question is, are you a pro or a con person regarding cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and Ethereum? Are you skeptical? Do you see the value, or are you basically, what's your opinion there?
Well, I mean, $200 billion valuation doesn't really lie. It's hard to be against that. So I'm not invested into Bitcoin, but that's because I'm approach things from a technical manner. They have definitely proven themselves in their own way. Whether Bitcoin is really a currency or a kind of digital gold is a debate I would be glad to have. I do not really consider Bitcoin a currency, frankly said.
No.
I consider it closer to a digital asset as gold than a currency.
No, I would perfectly agree, and I asked this question for a special reason, because what could happen now is that the corporate world and blockchain slows down a little bit, because budgets are drying up, things are being postponed, as you have said, and on the other hand side, the crypto stuff could even speed up with all the debt being produced and so on. So in the past, we could see in conferences and elsewhere that both streams, like corporate world and also crypto world, are moving basically in parallel here and there. And now, could it be that these developments, at least the speed of these developments, are falling apart?
I wouldn't be surprised if that would happen now, yes. No. I wouldn't be surprised, because let's see how that goes. Assuming it continues to go well, and I can only caution, if this whole dynamics that's happening in the DeFi sector is not ending up in another ICO disaster, if that can be avoided, then there's very big dynamics there right now. There's a lot of discussions, you are part of that, about CBDC. China is barging ahead on that one, so this is happening. So I could very well see that those part of the players that come from the manufacturing side of things, and those part of the players who truly come from the digital crypto part of things, that the speeds will diverge. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I think this will be very exciting next year, and it's not easy to predict. It's basically impossible. Do you see any connections between, say, an automotive company and crypto assets? That's difficult, right? Because apparently you want to track things. If you are making things pay, then this will happen in euro.
There's a very basic rule of just corporate business. Crypto is based very much on more or less anonymous. It's actually not anonymous, but pseudonymous, but let's get not into that. So it's basically, you don't need to verify an identity. It's all based, you trust the transaction, not the person. Obviously, that doesn't work in a corporate world. We need to know who our counterparty is. Our accountants tell us that, the banking regulator tell us that, so we cannot deal with unidentified parties. So that's already a very big difference in blockchain for crypto as opposed to the more boxed-in blockchain for corporates. So where I do see very much a natural merging, but is where you look at regulated tokenizations. So security token offerings, which basically take a little bit away from the free spirit of the token economy, put it into, you can call it change, you can call it restrictions, but put it into a format that it is ultimately handled by a regulated stock exchange, and leverage the mechanisms behind them just as well, and put that to the use of people who would like to fund their industrial assets, their charging infrastructure, and as such. That I see as a viable and reasonable kind of scenario, which is also acceptable to those who run corporate entities. The full-blown public, DeFi way of doing business, I would expect this takes a long time and it takes modifications before this can be embraced by people who ultimately need standard, Jahresabschluss, standard tax declarations, standard auditing, etc.
Okay, let's talk about this type of tokenization. That's the tokenization of industrial goods for basically pre-financing them. Are you working on such use cases, or is this basically 1, 2, 3 years down the line?
No, that's pretty much public knowledge already. So with the Börse Stuttgart and a small venture company from Stuttgart as well called 51 Nodes, we have been working on this now since 2019. And when the first products will be launched is a question that I cannot fully answer. The Börse Stuttgart should answer that question. And I do know the Börse Stuttgart is very far advanced on this, but they're not the only ones that are considering this. We also see movements in Asia where it will go into the same direction. So this is happening and people are working on that. Switzerland is very strong in that sector. Liechtenstein's got a beautiful legal framework. So this is coming sooner rather than later. You just got to factor in the whole Corona stuff again. But if I would be able to basically cut out the Corona effects, I would have said this is coming next year. Now I cannot really say that confidently anymore.
So this means basically a device is making a security token offering, something like this, and then people are investing in this industrial good to make it available and to finance the infrastructure, right? Could it also be possible, and if so, when, to use DeFi financial instruments and DeFi financial power to fund such an physical infrastructure?
Well, I will say the same thing about DeFi that I will say about ICO. The mechanisms and the systems and the principles that are being explored and developed here are beautiful. And they will revolutionize the way finance is going. But this is still very much Wild West. So right now, I believe for conservatively structured corporations, this is probably too hot to touch. And personally, I believe, just like we have seen the abuse of the ICO mechanism, which doesn't say anything about the mechanism itself. The mechanism itself is extremely valid, but we have seen the abuse of it and the crypto winter that it resulted in. I am almost 100% sure, I'm willing to put money on the table, that we will see a DeFi bust. This will blow up. There will be abuse of it, because the famous word I would like to quote here is, there is very irrational exuberance on what it can do. It's very valid, it's very powerful, but if you look at some of those products and some of what is done there, whoa, buyer beware, huh?
Yeah, it's partly built a little bit too speedy for the amounts of money which are being spent here. This is a little bit out of balance. Same with ICOs at that time, right? Okay, and if you look at neighboring industries, for example, manufacturing, then in around South Germany, you also have healthcare companies, and so on. What are you observing there with regards to blockchain technology? Is the same pattern with Daimler pushing it, but then being pushed back by Corona, thinking about tokenization, thinking about the digital euro, or do you see specific industries being faster than others?
Well, right now, the one thing that seems to be embraced, even though maybe slower, is there seems to be consensus across the industry that in the supply chain, provenance is a big topic. So both for human rights purposes, so do we get our minerals from places where human rights are preserved, as well as environmental concerns. Is the electricity or is the part that I'm using here, has it been produced with green energy as opposed to dirty energy? That seems to be more and more in the focus of big industrial players. So I would believe the main real activities that we can see in the next year, a lot of them are going to be centered on this provenance story, if it can be done, because the complexity of this is extremely high. The principle is very easy to think, but you're dealing with very physical, partly very old, very disconnected physical elements, and whatever you put in your blockchain, if you cannot track it back to the physical truth, then you haven't really done much. So,
and you're doing this across companies and across geographical destinations, so this is like a huge ecosystem.
And across legal frameworks, across boundaries. So the risk here is that you fall into false assurance. Oh, this blockchain thing is totally immutable. We put it in there, so it must be true. But just because it's on the blockchain does not mean it's true. It just means you haven't changed the record. Whether what was put in there was true in the first place, or is still true and hasn't been exchanged. So what prevents, I put a piece of, certified mineral into a container, so now I know in the port of whatever, now I have gotten clean cobalt. Yeah, well, what prevents anybody in that port open the container, take out the clean cobalt, put dirty cobalt in back again? If I don't have a physical way of controlling that, and how am I going to be able to do that? Yeah. Then my beautiful blockchain end-to-end supply chain is giving me false assurances. And I see the biggest challenge in all of these supply chain projects, I see in the physical truth, not in the technology.
Yeah, that's a good point, and getting correct data into the chain. A last topic I would like to touch upon is related to machine identities. Where are we standing here? Of course, it's easy to say this machine is having an ID and another one is having another ID, but where do we stand with regard to standardization of such identities, also creating identities such that machines can start communicating among each other? This is also quite some way to go, right?
Well, technically, I consider it basically solved. So technically, on the how to do it, not a big deal anymore. So companies like Riddle and Code, like ITOS in China or others have done it. So to provide a vehicle with a blockchain identity, a blockchain wallet, connect that to the basically telematics if it's a car, technically speaking, is not something, it's not rocket science anymore. And with regards to standardization, now you're approaching, there's many levels of standardization. You got standardization at the level of the VDA, of the KBA, so basically where your vehicles are registered. You got the standardization at the level of the title document. You got the standardization at the level of the VIN, or the FIN as you call it in Germany, the vehicle identification number. So there's many layers of standards, and ultimately they need to somehow mesh together. From the digital aspect, I believe, pragmatically speaking, if I look at what's happening now, but it's an evolving environment, what we see in the W3C DID sphere of things seems to be promising. So some of it is overboard. So this total intergalactic interoperability is too early. I wouldn't focus on that. The internet wasn't started with the routing protocols we have now. It was started with point-to-point and organically grew, and then standards evolved. So we need to have a standard before we start moving, I consider a mistake. But let's be pragmatic here. But the DID standards, DID-COM standards, I mean, we've got Carsten Stöcker here, who is a specialist on this much more than I am. They provide a very reasonable base to start using identities, securely and achieve interoperability.
Excellent. I think that was the perfect cliffhanger for the next presentation by Carsten, right? Thanks. I just asked what I wanted to ask you anyway, catching you up, but now we had some people witnessing this talk. Thanks for being so spontaneously to basically fill this gap left by another speaker, and thanks for being here and coming here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and always enjoy talking to you.